Hey guys, and welcome back. It's Gina. I am back with a brand new tutorial. This one is called the Crystal Mirage Pendant. It comes from the Opulence Echo Collection by Eureka Crystal Beads. It just came out earlier this month. And this one, as you can see, uses some of those spectacular looking purple twisted bugle beads, along with some other sizes of seed beads that came in that collection, and also the fire polish. I don't have a bail or anything, but you can definitely add this to a jump ring or your own beaded bail or a beaded rope, whatever you want to do. There's a little look at the back. And as usual, I will have the list of all the materials you'll need to make this pendant listed down below the video in the description section, and also the link to the Opulence Echo Collection if you'd like to get your hands on that as well. So to get started, we can go ahead and grab a comfortable length of beading thread. I'll be using the 6-pound 0.006 inch diameter Fireline and cutting off a comfortable length of that for a size 11 beading needle. I do recommend you also have a size 12 available because there are going to be some tight spots to get through around this bezel as you go through those little seed beads. So go ahead and thread your beading needle and we will jump into this tutorial. So first we're going to pick up 36 of our 11-0 seed beads. Picking them up in groups of 10. I'm going to slide these first 10 down towards my tail thread. Now I need 26 more. That's 12, 13, 14, 16, and then I need 10 more. So much for my groups of 10. I tried. All right, so I'm pulling the rest of these down and I'm going to give them one more double check before we continue on to make sure that I have 36 total on my thread. It's 10, 20, all right, 36. And like we've done before in the other square stitch tutorials, going to sew back through the first bead only, which is down there on the tail end of the thread. And you are welcome to use a stop bead. I will not stop you. I'm just going to hold this with my thumb and my forefinger while I get this process started. So I'm so used to doing that by now. And I'm going to pick up one 11-0 and I'm going to sew through the 11-0 I'm currently coming out of plus one more bead. They're sitting side by side now. I'm picking up a new one, sewing through the bead we just added, pulling that close to the beadwork and sewing up through the 11-0 next to that, plus the next one, and then one more. Pull tight. You can keep drawing that closer as you need to, pulling that tail thread as well. We're going to keep doing this all the way around the entire piece till we get back to where we started, adding a new bead going through the one that we just added. And I'm sewing up through the 11-0 next to that, plus the next one, plus one more. So just keep adding, total of 36 more beads just like this in your square stitch, adding one bead at a time, taking your time. And this is going to make for a very nice and neat stacked up bezel. And by the time we get to the beginning of our beadwork, we'll have about 2 rows stacked in place. And we'll be able to continue on. So just keep going and we will meet back at the beginning of this loop. All right, I am on the last bead of this row, so I'm just continuing up through those 2 and going through that one that we have left so I can add that new bead next to it. Going back through the previous bead as usual, pulling this tight. And then I'm going to sew through those next 2 beads. And we're at the top of what's going to be the top of our pear bezel. And I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through the next bead that we get to in that same row just to start to pull this together. And then I'm going to go in the other direction through the bead next to that at the very top. And we want to add one new bead in place in between where those strips of beads are coming together. So I've picked one up. I'm going to sew through the very next bead. That's going to indicate to us where the top is. I'm going to sew up through the very next bead on the next row, the one that's next to us. And I'm going to pick up a new bead and sew through the next bead on that row and pull. And now when I set it kind of like this, you can see we've got a bead on each row sitting next to each other that are kind of sticking up a little bit over top of the rows of square stitch. That'll become more obvious as we go along. And also our second row that we added is a little bit looser than the first one. Don't worry about that. That one is going to tighten up as we go. For right now, I'm going to swing through the bead on the next row. And you can see that next bead is the new one we added at the peak. I'm going to skip that one, kind of sewing underneath, but not through any beads until I get to the one right after that. And by doing that, that'll keep our bead up there sticking out at the peak. And this time we can continue on with our 15-0 seed beads, and we're going to complete a new round in square stitch, this time using our 15-0s. So our bezel's gonna start to get a little bit smaller and fit around that crystal shape very nicely. So coming out of that 11-0 that's right there, and of course I'm going to continue on by picking up a 15-0, sewing through the 11-0 that we're coming out of, plus one more. Pull that tight, and you can see there's our first 15-0 in place, and we'll continue by picking up a new one, sewing up through the bead we just added, pulling tight, sewing down through the 11-0 next to that, followed by the next one, followed by one more. Pulling tight after each addition, picking up a new bead, going through the previous 15-0 that we just added. And continuing this step all the way around, again going through the 11-0 directly next to that, plus the next one, and one more. So continue adding your 15-0s onto this side of your bezel, and like we did before, we'll meet back once you get to about the beginning of your loop again, and then I'll show you what's next. So keep going, you're doing great. I'll see you back in just a moment. All right, everyone, welcome back. We are coming out of this 11-0 here. So I've got my last 15-0 to add on for this row, just going up through the 15-0 previous to that, going up through these two 11-0s in the center row, which are just before the peak. So I'm coming out right there, and I'm going to swing my needle going in the other direction, going through the 15-0s that we added, and I'm going to just continue sewing through all of those 15-0s, bringing them together so that they start to tighten up and make for a tighter, snugger, more snug bezel that will start to hug either the front or the back of the crystal depending on which side we put this on. So I'm just going through as many 15-0s as I can at one time, making sure I get all of them, and gradually starting to pull these a little bit tighter as I go through the beads, little by little. And now I'm back to the other side, just like that. You can see that it's already started to tighten up quite a bit, and it's also taking shape of our pear stone. So what I'm going to do now is actually continue through these beads. I'm going to go through them one more time, all those 15-0s, and note that I didn't add yet the additional 15-0 at the peak. So I'm just skipping right over to the other side again and sewing through all these 15-0s. And by the way, if you need to switch to a size 12 beading needle, you can do that if you're having any trouble going through these little 15-0s again. But so far I'm doing okay with my size 11, so I'm just gonna keep at it. This is gonna reinforce this row and continue to shape up our beadwork. And if you need to use a little pair of pliers to help you sometimes pull your needle through, that can be a good trick. Just make sure you don't force your needle too much. You definitely don't want to break any beads, and it takes some time to learn how that feels. You know, what you know that you can get through and what you definitely don't want to push yourself to get through, because then it's not worth it and you're going to be starting over. I know that because I've done that. All right, so here is one side of our bezel complete, and what we want to do is, again, I'm not worrying about the little 15-0 that's going to go at the peak at this time, but right now I'm going to sew down through the 11-0 in the center next to the peak, and I'm going to sew through the following 11-0 on the other side. And what I'm doing is just getting my needle and thread in place so that we can add on our next row of 15-0s. And right now I'm skipping that peak seed bead and going through the next. This thread here is just my tail thread. I have yet to weave that back in, but I will soon. And what we're gonna do is add on our 15-0s, making one more row of square stitch all the way around on this opposite side. So I've picked one up, and once again I'm going through the bead that I'm coming out of, plus one more, sitting that 15-0 next to our 11-0, picking up a new 15-0, sewing through the previous one that we just added, going down through these two beads plus one more, and we can continue doing that all the way around. And once we get to the other side, again, we'll meet back before we tighten anything up, because of course we'll be adding in our crystal, and for our final tighten up we want to have our crystal in place so that when we do tighten our beads and our thread, they will take the shape of the crystal and it'll create nice neat form. So keep going with your square stitch and your 15-0s, making your final row at the back, attaching them to all those 11-0s, and when you get back to the beginning of this row, we'll meet back and we'll continue on. All right, so now with this final row of 15-0s just about done, I've got all those 15-0s in place, except for, again, at the top where we have the peak. And I have my needle coming out of this 15-0 right here, which is right before where we started. And what we want to do is we can actually take our crystal and set it face down into our beadwork with the point there right at the peak like we planned it. And we can take our needle and thread and continue sewing through the next 15-0s that we get to, as many as your needle will go through, which is going to start to tighten this up around the back of our crystal. So we're going to go through a few beads at a time and keep pulling this tight around the back. Just going gradually, making sure we don't miss any beads back there. Look how nice and neat that's coming together. Almost back to the beginning again. Those are the last 3 15-0s on this side. And we can pull that tight. And I'm going to pick up one new 15-0, which is going to go at the peak. And I'm going to sew around all these 15-0s again to further reinforce and tighten these beads around the back. Letting that seed bead we just added sit right up there at the top. And we're going to head back towards it as we go through a few of our beads at a time and still continue to pull this tight around the back of the crystal. And it should be a little bit snug trying to get a size 11 needle through there, but for the most part it'll make it. If you do need to switch to that smaller needle, definitely do that and don't force your way through like I mentioned before. So now I'm going through those final 2 beads on this side before we get to that one that we just added at the peak. Giving that a final pull tight. And I'm going to skip that bead at the peak and just sew through a few more beads on the other side of it. While I'm pulling this thread, I'm going to let it try to sit underneath that peak bead just to keep that more in place. See right there how it makes that nice corner appear. And then I'm going to take my thread and go directly up through some of those 11-ohs. Just one. You do want to leave some room. We are going to be sewing around those 11-ohs on that lower row again as we continue on with our next step. So you want to try to keep your thread passes limited as best you can going through there to prepare for that. But mainly I am just making my way to the front of the piece again, just following the thread path. And I'm going to go right over and through the 15-ohs heading up towards the peak, because remember we didn't add a seed bead there at the very top on the front yet. We're going to do that now. Pulling that tight, picking up a 15-oh, and you can sew through all those beads again now if you'd like, or just sew through a couple, but we're just getting that 15-oh in place at the top of this front area. So it sits there at the peak. You can continue to shape this a little bit with your fingers. It'll all start to come together. I think what I'm going to do is add a size 12 needle on right now. And I'm going to go around this front section one last time, just so it's seamless and we can get that out of the way. And then we'll start working on the sides of the bezel. So let me add on a new needle and I will be right back. All right, so just going around those beads, definitely made it a little bit easier. And I like going around them in one shot. That way we don't have any gaps that appear in the bezel, even if they're slight. It's just not a difficult step usually to just continue the round all the way through. And it keeps that square stitch really uniform. Just pulling and keeping an even tension all the way around. And as we get back here where we started, it's just going to be really tight to the crystal. This time with the peak bead sitting at the top like we want. So I'm going through those last two right before it and pulling, and like we did on the other side, I'm going to skip that one at the peak, trying to train my thread to sit underneath it. But I'm just going to go through a couple more beads on the other side of it. As I'm pulling my thread, I'm going to let that loop try to sit underneath that peak bead so that as we pull it, we get that sharp corner right up there at the top. And then we can start to make our way through the next row of 11 O's. Gonna go through those two at the top. And then I'm gonna turn around and I'm gonna sew through the next one on the bottom row of 11 O's. So now we are in place to start adding some additional beads all around the outside. Okay, so now let's work with some of our 11 O seed beads around the side. Right now my needle is coming out of this 11 O right here, the one directly to the right of the peak bead on the bottommost row of 11 O's. And I'm going to pick up one of our 11 O's, skip the next bead that we get to, and sew directly through the next. And I'm continuing on with my size 12 beading needle, and they have a tendency to bend so easily. So this one will likely get pretty bent. That's all right. Like I said before, sometimes I use that to my advantage. Sometimes. We'll see how it goes. All right, so then we're going to continue on, skipping the next bead and sewing through the next. So doing this in sort of a peyote style fashion around the outside, adding in these additional 11 O's that are going to stick up and become spots for us to add in our bugle beads. Picking up a new 11 O, skipping the next and sewing through the next. We're going to do this until we get towards the bottom. And then we're going to do something a little bit different just because of spacing, since we're working with a teardrop shape. And we still want to keep this to where it can be symmetrical on both sides. So it took a little bit of playing with that to get that right. So far we've got 4 of our 11 O's in place. We can keep going, skipping the next one and sewing through the next. This one wanted to go through 2 beads, so I'm actually going to just back up through this one. Sometimes it's easier to do that. If not, I might swap out needles because this one has a wicked bend right at the end of it. So that can be a little tricky. Nothing we can't deal with though. Yep, in this instance, I'm gonna switch to a different needle because that isn't suiting me. No worries. Okay, we've got 7 right now around the side. I'm going to go in for another one, adding that into place, just like we've been doing. But then I'm going to sew through a few more beads. So you want 8 around the side where you just skipped over 1 seed bead. All right, at the very bottom, you can go through the next 3 beads instead. And we're going to be wrapping around the 2 beads that are at the very center, which would be these couple right here. So if I'm coming out of the right-hand side of that, I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to sew through those 2 plus 1 more. But what that did was it's now sitting one of our 11-0 seed beads over top of the very 2 that are central at the bottom of the crystal. And then we can continue on with the peyote stitch, adding in 1 seed bead over every other bead, making this symmetrical on the other side, so we should have the same space left over to add in 8 more 11-0s. So I picked one up, skipped a bead, going through the next. And we'll continue doing that 7 more times, and that should get us towards the top. And just pull that reasonably tight after each bead that you add. Four, 5, 6. We're going to do 2 more. Going through that last one right next to that peak seed bead at the top, pulling all of this, and now when we actually take a look at it, you can see what I've done here, getting those seed beads wrapped around the outside of the piece. Just want to give you a better look at how that looks from the different angles so you can see what we're working with and what we're going to continue on with. And now we want to take our needle and sew through that peak bead that we get to next. And we'll be coming out of that one, which is where we're going to start working with those twisted bugle beads. All right, so to me, this is the extra fun part. We get to work with our twisted bugles and start adding them in. It's a little bit easier to work with those than trying to get through the beads around the bezel. So we've gotten past that point. Now with our needle coming out of the top, we're going to pick up a bugle, a 15-0. So pull out some more of those 15-0s, and then a bugle. So you've got that sequence on your needle. And then you're going to skip the next seed bead that you get to around the side and sew through the next one. So we're going to actually be wrapping 2 layers of bugles around the bezel, and they are going to sit in an alternating pattern, which will give it this fun layered effect. But that's our first couple of beads in place, plus our 15-0 that's at the peak, coming out of this 11-0 here. And let's continue on. Bugle, 15-0, and bugle, skip the next 11-0, and sew through the next. Taking your time, so as you pull, these are sitting in this manner, forming their own little peak with the 15-0 right in the center. Again, bugle, 15-0 and bugle. Skip the next seed bead and sew through the next. So now I'm going to head through that one that's sitting next to our bottom seed bead. Got 4 of those in place. And we'll just keep going the same way, even though there's a little bit more space at the bottom. Skipping a bead and going through the next. And so now you can see we are at the beginning again, and we have the spacing that we want to add in one more around this row, skipping that next bead, this time sewing through the next one, which we had already connected with some bugles at the start. So now we have something like this to get us started. And what we want to do is just sew through a couple of our beads. And I'm going to tell you, if you don't want to go through the bezel, just go behind and go through this bead right here, because we're going to be adding additional beads. That little bit of thread that's more visible at this moment, which is not that big of a deal, it isn't going to be very visible at all. So rather you do that than break any beads at this point. And now we can do the exact same thing we've been doing. We're just doing that additional layered row that's gonna be sitting on alternate beads. So we're coming out of this one here, we're gonna skip this bead now and go through the next 11-0 that's sticking up that we hadn't used yet. Once we pull those bugles in place, you can see how that one sits in the center of the 2 below it. And let's keep going. Skipping that one, sewing through the one that's open, and pulling those into place. Now we're at the center of the bottom. how fun that is. These bugle beads are having a moment on my bead mat from this collection. All right, we're almost to the other side. And there's that one that's hanging out. And we need to add our final bugle section at the top. This time going through the 11-0 over here where we had started that row. And here's what we have so far with our bugle beads in place, and we just have a little bit more that we're going to do around the top to finish this off. All right, so now I went ahead and pulled out some of the 4mm fire polish beads. We're going to add some of those around the outside. And I'm going to start with one of those. And my thread's coming out of that 11-0 directly to the right of our peak bead. And I'm going to sew through the 11-0 that's on the other side of this bugle section. So I'm skipping the one that's back there and going through the next. Just holding that in place. I'm going to pick up another one. Skipping that 11-0 back there and going through the next one again. Repeating that once more. And then once we get towards the bottom, because it's a little bit bigger in terms of the space, let's pick up a 15-0, a fire polish, and a 15-0. And sew through the 11-0 in the center. And do the same thing on the other side. 15-0, fire polish, 15-0, sewing through the next 11-0 as normal, and then adding in our remaining 3 4mm beads, making that symmetrical on both sides, skipping over that bead, going through this one, and then adding in one more. Coming out of that 11-0 down there. And then once we get to that bead, we're going to pick up 4 new 11-0s, then skip the peak seed bead there, sew through the next 11-0 that's right before the fire polish, and also sew through that next fire polish bead. And then let's pick up 3 of our 15-0s. And we'll sew through the next fire polish. Do that again, 3 15-0s. Sew through the next fire polish. And repeat that again. This time we're coming out down at the bottom. And then we'll pick up 3 11/0s. Sewing through the next fire polish. And then adding in our 15/0s like we did before on the other side, making this symmetrical. So 3 15/0s, sewing through the next fire polish bead, doing that again. And then sewing through the next 11/0 that was already in place, also sewing through the next 2 11/0s right there out of those 4 that we added at the top. Pick up a new 15/0 and sew through the next 2 11/0s. There's that 15/0 we just added sitting at the top. You can go through the 11/0 we get to next, that's right before the fire polish, and pull. And then we can go around this section again. You can go through the next 15/0 and skip the next. Sew through the next fire polish and the next 15/0. And what we're doing is just getting that central 15/0 to stick up just a little bit, giving that a little peek. We're skipping the next 15/0 in this section, going through the next plus the fire polish and the next 15/0, and using our needle if we need to pop out that 15/0 in the center just a little bit. Skipping the next 15/0, going through the next, and this time going through the fire polish and the next single 11/0 down there at the very bottom. At that point we can pick up 3 new 15/0s, skip the 11/0 in the center, go through the next one, go through the fire polish and the next 15/0, pull. Now you can see we've got those 3 15/0s in place at the bottom. Just going to take my needle and move this 15/0 up a little bit as we go. There we go. And then continue sewing, skipping that central 15/0, going through the next and the 4mm in the next one. And they'll want to sit on the inside at first, but you can just move them with your needle. We're almost back to the beginning. And I'm coming out of that fire polish. Pop this bead out. And let's see, let's go through the next 3 11/0s, and this time just skip the 15/0 that's at the very top that we added in the last round, and go through the next 3 11/0s and come out of the fire polish. Pull this tight, and then you can take a look at the beads you have around this central section. Again, just taking a minute to take your needle and poke out the ones that are in the center a little bit, just making those come to a little bit more of a point, just like that. And at this point, our pendant is complete. So now we can just take our needle, we can make a few half-hitch knots going around some of the beads carefully, preferably some that are a little bit looser and easier to move through. And you can work your way to the back. If you want to add more beads on the back to cover up that section, you're welcome to do that. And we can add a bail at the top, or you can simply reinforce this section and add a jump ring or a bail coming off of the top of this bugle bead section. All right, you guys, so that wraps it up for today's video. I want to thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this project. Feel free to share pictures with me on social media, tag me there so I can check them out. I love seeing what you guys have made, and especially if you choose to use different colors. Eureka Crystal Beads has so many of these products in other colors, and that's certainly going to be fun to check out if you do decide to make your own color combination. But anyway, thank you all so much. Don't forget to check down below for the links to the Opulence Echo Collection. I hope you'll like this video and subscribe to my channel because I would love to see you back. I have more in store, and I will see you again real soon. Until next time, I hope you all have a fabulous rest of your day, and as always, happy beading.